I'm back, part 2 with my old friend Max, and by that I don't mean he's particularly old, it's just that we've known each other for a long time. Okay, so a big part of your life right now is spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say like a big part of my life, because saying that almost makes it separate from the rest of everything else that I do.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So I think spirituality is a challenging thing to talk about because it is such a catch-all term. And there are those people who would say, like, I commit 70% of my life to practice of my spirituality. So,
Which is fine.
It is, and I don't mean to take the opportunity to define it that way from them. But yeah, I mean...
But your spirituality, though.
Yeah.
What it means to you.
So yeah, I mean, for me, the way that I really look at it is it has to do with my relationship with myself, with the world around me, and like how I take action in the world. It's kind of like a rhythm by which I move, you could say.
Mm-hmm. So, again, it's just like it's such a vague term to define.
Yeah.
Could you describe maybe some practices that you've come across?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one again, because I feel like when you mention spirituality, it conjures certain ideas in people's heads, and I feel like if I could mention to you a practice, it's going to conjure similar ideas in people's heads.
Oh, okay.
So
is there a way to go about this then?
I think so.
Okay. So
I'll speak with you briefly about the history of religions and spirituality. That sounds like a big topic, but I can go over it pretty quick.
Okay.
So basically, if you look at most world religions, they started because there was some person who, within the specific cultural context, was looked at as being very enlightened or having a lot of wisdom to share and a lot of positive change to implement in that social context. This happened in different ways, but long story short is that wisdom was so celebrated that people created these larger institutions that were designed to spread that wisdom. So this is religion, basically, right? And so I think that in talking about spirituality, it's basically in talking about that visceral sense of connection, having a relationship with place, with people, etc. Many people, this is why I said for myself it's difficult to slot spirituality into one thing, because I think that many people consider themselves not to be spiritual because they don't have any connotations with different religious forms, or they don't ascribe to that. But I mean, honestly, to me, if you're considering how you should show up in the world, if you're considering how you should treat others, how you should treat the planet, you're a spiritual person, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it that way, then everyone in some way or fashion is spiritual.
Exactly. All things are divine, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I don't want to label, people as a certain way, but I mean, yeah, that's just what it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's a lot of question, especially when considering spirituality, of what's good and what's bad. But yeah, for myself, I go back to that all things are divine thing. So it's like life is playing itself out.
So I guess it has been like an aspect of your life then.
Yeah.
That you've really come into.
Yeah. I'd say so.
Okay. And do you have any idea of kind of like what that scene or that subculture could look like in Vancouver, or what it is, or what it looks like?
I mean, speaking to that cultural mosaic that I mentioned before,
I'll be using that from now on. It's taken.
So yeah, using that, in Vancouver you do get lots of different groups of folks who are like Christian or Sikh or Buddhist, etc. And within that you have your own spiritual practice, of course. Right. There's that. There's also kind of like more New Agey spirituality, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term.
New Agey, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you definitely get collections of folks who don't necessarily ascribe to a specific religion, but notice the commonality of an intention to do good work amongst others who would say that they're spiritual people.
Oh, okay. Because I know that in Vancouver, since it is a mosaic, you do have all kinds of people with all kinds of beliefs and backgrounds. And a big part of what I try to do with this podcast is, I guess, connect people to, not necessarily where they need to be, but to let people know that there are options and there are many kinds of people in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're just new in town or if you've just been around but don't exactly know who or where to talk to, then,
right.
I just want to get it out there that there are, there's different kinds of people and there's many communities out there.
Yeah, totally.
So would you consider yourself, again, I guess you said you don't really spend much time in, was it public spaces?
I guess you could say, yeah.
Right. Do you find yourself, or do you identify yourself with any specific community then?
Well, I think when talking about like subcultures, it's important to recognize that as an individual, we are a subculture.
Yep.
We're a collection of social experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And even for someone like myself who doesn't necessarily spend a lot of time outwardly in like events or what have you, I am still a collection of social issues or social experiences, right? So yeah, I mean, that being said, I definitely have experience in like activism, education, spirituality in the sense that I work with it in my life. The exposure that I've had to that has actually been more so through like doing reading or like watching documentaries and this kind of stuff. What I would say is that like this stuff's pretty easy in our information age to find, right? Like you can look up Buddhism, look up whatever you're into.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Exploring. Yeah, the access that we have is amazing for sure. In terms of actually going to physical space, it's not as hard as people think, and in some respects it is harder than people think. Because I feel like, again, you can Google it and you can find like monasteries or what have you. But then, like, I do definitely see a lot of groups on, like, Facebook or whatever, where these are all people who regularly meet with each other and they have kind of a community,
Yep.
But unfortunately, I can't give too much advice or recommendation about how to access that rather than just, like, put yourself out there and do it.
Just use the Google, you'll find something.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like, I guess the way that I've been exposed to these groups is that, like, for the small amount of socializing or social interaction that I do, I'll get connected with them on Facebook, and then they're connected with these groups on Facebook, so I get exposure to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is a very, like, introverted way of learning about these groups. You can also definitely learn about them just through, like, engaging and being more sociable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like, if you want to find membership in one of these or want to find, like, that place of belonging, just put yourself out there because that's part of the game.
And that's kind of, again, another objective of this podcast is that it's like a podcast, right? It's like a way of having conversation without having conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people who are listening, they hear this, right? And I hope anyways that they're kind of engaged and kind of feel a connection.
Yeah.
So as to kind of take that step to put yourself out there and to meet people, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of my idea, is to reach out to people in many communities so I can, it's not so much that I'm doing the reaching out for you,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to make that bridge, that connection for people to be able to take it upon themselves to do so.
Cool.
It's also a place to also be funny and entertaining on a podcast,
Uh-huh.
but it's always, you get what you get out of it, right?
Yes.
Okay. So is there any other topics that you want to cover in the short time we have left? In particular, plugs. Nice hair. How'd you do your hair? What shampoo you subscribe to?
I feel like there's so much that we could talk about. We can do a part. Well, I guess it'd be part 3 at this point because we've had a part 1 and a part 2. So
yeah. Again, we could talk about all kinds of things.
Totally. How about you? Is there anything more that you're curious about in terms of what I've spoken to?
Yeah, before we started airing, we talked about a lot of stuff, and I thought, like, oh man, this is good material, I should save it, but, you can't really, it's a conversation, right?
I hear you.
I guess we do have some time left. What do you think about, just modern day, in Vancouver anyways, interactions, but, again, it's kind of a hard question, because you said you don't spend much time in both places, but just the general interactions between people nowadays in the city, if you have an opinion at all.
You know what? I actually went to. Oh shoot, the name is escaping me. I went to an event by...
So you do go out.
Oh my goodness, yes. And I mean, I when I talk about my version, I talk about it in comparison to what I perceive as the average person. So, where the average person is out like drinking and partying and stuff. I'm like, I'll just stay inside, thanks. You know?
But yeah, so you went to an event.
I went to an event by a nonprofit called City Hive.
City Hive.
So they're actually doing a lot of work in connecting young people to politics and connecting young people to civic process. So the talk that I went to, I was in a similar position as I'm in now of being like, I don't really occupy public space. They were talking about occupation of public space, and they were talking about how public space is shaped. So yeah, for any folks who are interested in that, I would highly recommend checking out City Hive in Vancouver.
So yeah, actually step out of your house and do that. I find that a lot of interactions nowadays, especially with the younger generation, and I guess, you know, people nowadays, there's a lot of online interactions, like over social media, over the internet, over, you know, even Reddit, right? Are you familiar with like a certain app on your phone that will let you swipe left and right depending on your conditions?
I haven't downloaded it, but I'm aware of it.
Okay, so I'm not sure if that's a form of social interaction. It kind of is. I'm not.
Definitely,
it's kind of like asynchronous, but I mean, it is out there. Do you feel that the digital age that we live in, I guess, with all the stuff we have now, how do you feel that it has a bearing on interactions?
In some senses, it makes it easier. In some senses, it makes it a lot more horrible than it could be. I feel like there's talking about the sense of spirituality that I have in my life, that it very much comes from connection with other people, right? And you know, for anyone who's like pet a dog or hugged another human being, you know that there's like an element of just being in physical space, you know. And I feel like online is great because it allows people to connect in ways that they haven't before. But it's challenging in the sense that people use that instead of engaging in the world around them. You know, and I suppose I'm a funny person to be talking about this, given that introverted thing, but
introvert nature. But from your perspective, anyways.
Yeah, and you know, again, like I do enjoy interacting with people for the extent that I do, and yeah, that in-person element or that occupation of physical space, we could go on for a long time about like nervous systems and how our bodies engage with like just connecting with other people. But long story short is that there is something to like our history as a species. We're more so designed to engage with others in like that person-to-person sort of basis. And with the way that our bodies are shaped, I don't want to say that it's impossible to be in like a positive body mental state without that, but having some kind of interaction is certainly a gigantic boon towards it.
Right, and it kind of leads into, I guess, communities again, right?
Exactly.
So communities form, I think that's a whole different discussion about how communities can form, right? I mean, we could talk a long time about that. But nowadays you have online communities that form or congregate based off, I don't know, some kind of common element, I imagine.
Yeah.
Right? And proceed to, I guess if they're local, you could end up forming some kind of gathering offline to meet people as a possibility. It's like online dating, right? But for a community.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there is that option, and I feel that Vancouver is a relatively safe enough city to facilitate that kind of activity. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely like danger that you can experience. I mean, I'm a martial artist on the side, and I speak with.
Oh, well, there we go. That's.
I speak with some martial arts teachers who kind of have an into like crime in Vancouver and that, and it's definitely out there. Compared to other spots in the world, it's minimal. And then I would say as well, depending on your demographic, like we're both men talking about this, and like saying it straight up, women just have a harder time because we live in a patriarchal culture where men sometimes think that they're entitled to women's bodies, and it can be like pretty, like for lack of a better term, abusive, you know.
And unsafe.
Exactly.
So what you do gatherings, do them in the broad daylight.
Yeah, I mean, there is such a thing as safe space.
Of course.
I just thought that it was right to acknowledge that in talking about level of safety, because it's something experienced differently by different people. But yeah, I think that what you're describing about using online interaction as a tool to enrich in person, there's some wisdom to that.
Okay. I mean, because we have this nowadays, like, I always, like, rag on this phenomena that I find it to everyone. It's like when you go to a restaurant with your partner or family, and you just, like, you're supposed to eat together, right? I mean, again, it's depends on the household and the relationships, but, like, you go to a place together and you just spend all the time on your cell phones instead of, interacting.
And that's where people are doing it instead of that physical interaction.
Again, I mean, I'm bothered by it, but I mean, at the same time, that's their right.
I mean, there's something to be said about subjective experience, and I mean, honestly, if people are having a great time doing that, then super. At the same time, though, like, I don't know, I've never really met someone who's like, I have such a loving, wonderful relationship with my partner, and we only interact through Facebook.
I mean, I'm sure it exists. Like,
be careful with that statement, because I want to find an actual physical example of it happening.
Well, what do you mean? Like,
well, you say you're sure it exists, and in saying that,
I think so.
It creates the possibility for it. But I want to see the actual example and see how that relationship actually is, because I mean, I haven't seen it before, and it's not to say that it can't happen. It's just that I've never seen it before, and from my own knowledge, I would love to be able to, like, witness that type of relationship where two people
not firsthand, but I don't know. You never know.
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, I know that the physical is an important thing.
Okay, well,
for
there
myself,
we go.
So like I couldn't do that, and so yeah, I would be curious to see where people have the option for physical interaction and online, and they're like, let's do only online, but like call this person my partner or something like this.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you have all kinds of people out there. You never know. I think it exists, and that's how you feel on it. Then that's what it is, right?
Well, again, though, that there's a challenge in that, because I think that it's easy to write things off as like, oh, this is my opinion and this is yours, but there are very functional consequences to opinions. So here I think it's important, rather than saying this is my opinion and this is yours, I think that because neither of us have a holistic knowledge of all the humans in the world,
that would be
it's appropriate to say like, hey, this is something that we should look into. But there is 100%, and this topic might be more innocent than others, but there's a danger to saying that like, oh, of course this exists, of course this is a thing, because it's basically a slippery slope to acknowledging things that aren't good for people, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you mean, and it's like, whether it's my intention not to say that, I won't say I'm promoting anything, but at the same time, like you said, like, there's no way we know every human being on the earth, right?
Yeah, so especially if you're going to advocate that something exists and that something can be healthy, it's good to know what you're actually advocating for before you do
like you said, there's ramifications, right?
Yes.
I'll consider that for next time, and next time I say something like, no, I can't even say anything right now, because it's like, no, I don't want to say that, or I don't want to plug this or that. But because I always say to my guests, like, you're allowed to say whatever I want, but it's always or whatever you want, but it's always reflective of you and not me.
Right.
But the vice versa is, the opposite is also true, right?
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah, it is a thing that, you gotta watch what you say. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can start winding down. Is there anything that you feel like you want to say in the last couple minutes of this at all?
Yeah, for the people out there, do what makes you happy, and go with that.
Whatever that may be.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, kind of as we've discussed, there's so many different ways to engage in life and engage in the world, and I mean, I know that for me, I have my own wisdoms, as it were, but following a sense of connection in your life, following that sense of joy, it's important. And I think that we all have things that we do out of like a sense of duty or obligation, but consider those things and consider if it's something that at the end of the day is serving you in some respect, because even if you're doing it for a really good reason, if you don't have a place within that to experience something positive for yourself, then it needs to change. Doesn't mean that you necessarily have to stop doing it, but you have to start being able to experience it positively in some respect, or switch to doing something else, because you're important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. It's important to... I mean, he pretty much summed it up right there. But yeah, it's always good to take care of yourself and find what it is that you want and what you need to do. Yeah, I guess that's about it then. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. Hopefully we'll get you on for, more times down the road.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Features. I should come up with a new catchphrase to end my podcasts, but, kind of on the spot, I can't think of anything right now. But as usual, this is Reno P signing out. Thank you so much for listening, and hope to catch you another time.